How does a calm father become the storm when his daughter's trust is betrayed? When I saw my daughter and granddaughter sleeping in a van at a gas station after I gave her an apartment, I knew something was horribly wrong. You wouldn't believe how the tables turned for those who thought I was just an old man with a checkbook. The fluorescent lights of the Speedway gas station buzzed overhead as I pulled up to Pump 3, my old Ford pickup truck groaning to a stop. It was nearly midnight, and the October air carried that crisp bite that reminded you winter was coming, whether you were ready or not. I'd been driving back from my buddy Pete's place in Columbus, where we'd spent the evening working on his '67 Mustang. At 59, I still couldn't resist the call of a good restoration project. As I stepped out to fill up, something caught my eye in the far corner of the parking lot. A white minivan sat under the dim glow of a streetlight, windows fogged with condensation. Something about it looked familiar: the dent in the rear bumper, the faded soccer mom stickers on the back window. My heart stopped. That was Hailey's van. I squinted through the darkness, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. What would my daughter be doing here at this hour? The apartment I'd bought for her was only 10 minutes away. I finished filling up quickly, my hands moving on autopilot while my mind raced with possibilities. Walking across the empty parking lot, my work boots echoed against the asphalt. As I got closer, I could make out shapes inside the van, someone sleeping in the driver's seat, a smaller form curled up in the back. My stomach dropped. I knocked gently on the driver's side window. "Hailey, honey, is that you?" The figure in the front seat stirred, and I heard the electronic whir of the window rolling down. My daughter's face appeared, puffy with sleep and streaked with dried tears. Her usually neat brown hair was disheveled, and she wore the same scrubs she'd had on 3 days ago when I'd last seen her. "Dad?" Hailey's voice cracked. "What are you doing here?" I could ask you the same thing. I kept my voice gentle, but inside, fury was building like steam in a pressure cooker. "Where is the apartment I bought for you? Why are you sleeping in your van?" That's when she broke down completely. Tears poured down her cheeks as she fumbled with the door handle, stepping out into the cold night air. Behind her, I could see my 4-year-old granddaughter Lila, still sleeping in her car seat, clutching her worn stuffed elephant. "My husband and my mother-in-law said I have no right and kicked me out," Hailey sobbed, the words tumbling out between gasps. "Curtis said the apartment belongs to him now because we're married. Virginia told me I was just a guest who'd overstayed my welcome. They changed the locks, Dad. They threw my clothes in garbage bags and left them on the porch." The rage that swept through me was white-hot and immediate. I'd spent 40 years running my auto shop, dealing with cheats and liars, but I'd never felt anything like this. These people had taken advantage of my daughter's kindness, stolen what I'd given her, and left her homeless with my granddaughter. "Get out and come with me now," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "Both of you. You're not spending another night in this parking lot." Hailey looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Dad, I don't want to be a burden." "You listen to me, Hailey Marie Thorpe." I used her full name, something I hadn't done since she was 12 and had tried to pierce her own ears with a safety pin. "You are my daughter. That little girl in there is my granddaughter. You will never, ever be a burden to me. Now get your things." As Hailey gathered their meager belongings from the van, a diaper bag, some clothes stuffed in a pillowcase, Lila's backpack, I gently lifted my sleeping granddaughter from her car seat. She stirred slightly, her small arms wrapping around my neck. "Grandpa Frank?" she mumbled against my shoulder. "I'm here, sweetheart. Everything's going to be okay now." Walking back to my truck with Lila in my arms and Hailey trailing behind with their things, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. It was the same cold, calculating anger that had served me well in business, the kind that didn't explode outward, but turned inward, sharpening into a blade. Curtis Benson and his mother had made a serious mistake. They thought they were dealing with some soft old man who'd roll over and accept their theft. They had no idea what Franklin Thorpe was capable of when someone hurt his family. As I buckled Lila into the booster seat I kept in my truck for our weekend adventures, my phone buzzed with a reminder notification. Lila's preschool tuition due Friday, $350. I glanced at the screen, then at my daughter's tear-stained face in the rearview mirror. Just as we were pulling out of the gas station, a familiar car drove past. Curtis's beat-up Camaro with Virginia in the passenger seat. They were laughing about something, probably celebrating their victory over my daughter. Neither of them noticed us. My jaw tightened as I watched their taillights disappear into the night. Enjoy it while you can, I thought. Your celebration is about to come to a very abrupt end. Back at my house, a modest ranch-style place I'd owned for 30 years, I settled Lila on the couch with her elephant and a warm blanket. She'd fallen back asleep almost immediately, exhausted from whatever ordeal she'd been through. Hailey sat at my kitchen table, wrapped in one of my old flannel shirts, nursing a cup of coffee with shaking hands. "Tell me everything," I said quietly, settling into the chair across from her. "Start from the beginning." Hailey stared into her coffee cup as if it held answers to questions she didn't want to ask. "It started small, you know, right after Curtis and I got married last spring. You remember how you gave us the apartment as a wedding gift?" I nodded. I'd bought the 2-bedroom unit in Maple Gardens specifically for them, a nice complex with a playground for Lila, close to the hospital where Hailey worked as a nurse. It had cost me $43,000, but seeing my daughter's face when I handed her the deed had been worth every penny. "Virginia was supposed to stay with us for just a few weeks," Hailey continued. "She'd been evicted from her place and had nowhere else to go. Curtis begged me to let her move in temporarily." I remembered that conversation. Hailey had called me, worried about the arrangement but not wanting to seem heartless. I'd advised her to set clear boundaries and a firm move-out date. Apparently, that hadn't happened. At first, she was helpful. She watched Lila while I worked my shifts, cooked dinner, kept the place clean. But then she started taking over. Hailey's voice grew smaller. She rearranged all my furniture, threw out my dishes because they didn't match her style, started referring to the apartment as our place and making rules about what I could and couldn't do. The picture was becoming clearer, and I didn't like what I was seeing. "What did Curtis say about all this?" Hailey let out a bitter laugh. "Curtis? He thought it was great. His mommy was taking care of everything, so he didn't have to lift a finger. When I tried to talk to him about setting boundaries, he'd say I was being ungrateful, that his mother was doing us a favor." I thought back to the last family barbecue I'd hosted in August. Virginia had made some joke about Hailey being just a guest in her own home, and everyone had laughed, everyone except me. I'd chalked it up to typical mother-in-law humor, but now I realized it had been a public humiliation designed to put my daughter in her place. "She started criticizing everything I did," Hailey went on. "The way I dressed, the way I parented Lila, my work schedule. She'd make these comments about how I was never home, how Lila needed a real mother figure in her life. Curtis would just nod along. 'What about the legal stuff? You said something about papers?' Hailey's face flushed with shame. "About a month ago, Virginia said there were some insurance forms that needed my signature. Something about adding Curtis to my health plan at work. I was running late for a shift, and she kept pushing the papers at me, saying it was urgent. So I signed them." A chill swept through me. "Did you read them?" "I skimmed them, but Virginia kept rushing me, saying the insurance office was closing soon, and if I didn't sign right away, Curtis would lose his coverage." Hailey looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Dad, I think I signed something I shouldn't have." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "We'll figure it out. What else happened?" "Last week things got really bad. I came home from a double shift to find Virginia had thrown out all my family photos, the ones of Mom, The pictures of Lila as a baby, everything. She said they were cluttering up her living room. When I got upset, Curtis told me I was being dramatic. The mention of my late wife's photos sent another wave of rage through me. Those pictures were irreplaceable memories of the woman I'd loved for 25 years before cancer took her. The fact that Virginia had thrown them away like garbage was unforgivable. Then yesterday I came home to find the locks changed. Virginia answered the door and told me I wasn't welcome anymore. She said Curtis was the man of the house now, and he'd decided I needed to learn some respect. My clothes were in trash bags on the porch, along with Lila's toys. Where was Curtis during all this? Standing behind his mother like he always does. He wouldn't even look me in the eye. Hailey wiped her nose with a tissue. I tried calling him later, begging him to at least let me get Lila's things, but Virginia took the phone and told me I was trespassing, and if I came back, she'd call the police. Just then, Hailey's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. "What is it?" She turned the phone toward me. It was a group text from Curtis to several family members. "Don't bother coming back. Mom says you're not welcome." Below that, Virginia had added her own message. "Some people need to learn their place. Hailey brought this on herself." I stared at the screen, memorizing every word. These people had just made another crucial mistake. They'd put their threats in writing. Standing up from the table, I walked to my home office and pulled out a business card from my desk drawer. Miles Underwood, attorney at law. Miles and I had served in the National Guard together back in the day, and he'd helped me with various business matters over the years. More importantly, he specialized in family law and had a reputation for being both thorough and ruthless when the situation called for it. "Hailey," I called from the office, "I want you to gather every document, every text message, every email you have from Curtis and Virginia, everything." "Why? What are you going to do?" I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. She was 28 years old, a registered nurse who saved lives for a living, a devoted mother who'd raised Lila mostly on her own even before this mess started. She deserved so much better than what these parasites had put her through. "I'm going to get your home back," I said quietly, "and I'm going to make sure Curtis and his mother understand exactly who they've been messing with." As I dialed Miles's number, I could hear Hailey in the kitchen, gathering her phone and what few papers she had. Outside, the first hints of dawn were creeping across the sky. It was going to be a very interesting day. The next morning, after Lila had eaten breakfast and was settled in front of cartoons, Hailey and I drove to Maple Gardens apartment complex. I wanted to see the situation for myself, and more importantly, I wanted Curtis and Virginia to see me. The complex was a tidy collection of two-story buildings arranged around a central courtyard with a playground. I'd chosen this place specifically because it felt safe and family-friendly. Now, knowing my daughter and granddaughter had been thrown out like unwanted furniture, it felt like a crime scene. Hailey directed me to Building C, Unit 7. As we climbed the stairs to the second floor, I could hear music playing loudly from inside. Some kind of country rock that definitely wasn't my daughter's taste. I knocked on the door, 3 firm raps that echoed in the hallway. The music stopped, and after a moment, the door opened to reveal Virginia Benson. She was a heavy-set woman in her mid-50s with bleached blonde hair and the kind of permanent scowl that suggested she found fault with everything around her. When she saw me, her expression shifted from annoyance to something like triumph. Well, well, if it isn't Daddy come to rescue his little princess. Virginia positioned herself in the doorway, blocking our view of the apartment. "You're wasting your time, old man. This is Curtis's place now." "Actually," I said, keeping my voice level, "this is Hailey's place. I have the deed to prove it." Virginia's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. "Deeds can be changed, Frank. Maybe you should have taught your daughter to read before she signed important papers." Behind her, Curtis appeared, a thin, weak-chinned man who'd always reminded me of a weasel. At 30, He still had the posture of a teenager trying to avoid responsibility. He put his hand on his mother's shoulder in a gesture that was probably meant to look supportive, but just made him appear more pathetic. "You can't just throw people out, Frank," Curtis said, his voice cracking slightly. "Even if you think you own the place. We have rights." I stepped closer to the doorway, and both Curtis and Virginia instinctively took a half-step back. "Rights? Let me tell you about rights, Curtis. My daughter has the right to live in the home I bought for her. My granddaughter has the right to sleep in her own bed instead of a van in a gas station parking lot. Those are the rights I care about." "Your precious daughter signed those rights away," Virginia sneered. "Curtis is the head of this household now, and he's decided she needs to learn some respect before she can come crawling back." I looked past them into the apartment, and what I saw made my jaw clench. The living room was trashed, pizza boxes stacked on the coffee table, beer cans scattered around, cigarette burns on the couch I'd helped Hailey pick out. The family photos that had been thrown away were replaced with Virginia's tacky decorations and Curtis's sports memorabilia. "I'd like to see those papers Hailey signed," I said. "You'd like a lot of things, wouldn't you?" Virginia stepped forward, jabbing her finger toward my chest. "Well, here's what you're going to get. Nothing. Your daughter made her choice when she decided to disrespect this family. Now she can live with the consequences." A door opened down the hall, and I saw a middle-aged woman peek out, probably drawn by Virginia's increasingly loud voice. The woman caught my eye and gave me a sympathetic look before ducking back inside. But not before slipping a small piece of paper under her door and nudging it toward me with her foot. Curtis, emboldened by his mother's performance, puffed out his chest. "Maybe this will teach you not to spoil your kids so much. Hailey never learned to appreciate what she had because Daddy always came running to fix everything." "Is that what you think this is about?" I asked quietly. "Spoiling my daughter?" "I think this is about you thinking your money makes you king of the world," Virginia spat. "Well, guess what? Your little princess isn't Daddy's girl anymore. She's Curtis's wife, and she'll do what Curtis says, when Curtis says it." I looked at Curtis, who was nodding along with his mother's words like a bobblehead doll. "And you agree with that, Curtis? You think throwing your wife and stepdaughter out on the street was the right thing to do?" Curtis's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed nervously. She needed to learn her place. Mom says, I repeated. "You're 30 years old, Curtis, and you're still letting Mommy make your decisions for you." Virginia's face flushed red. "Don't you dare talk to my son that way. Curtis is twice the man you'll ever be." I almost laughed at that. Curtis, who'd never held a job for more than 6 months, who'd moved back in with his mother 3 times before marrying Hailey, who couldn't change a tire or balance a checkbook. This was Virginia's idea of a real man. "We'll see about that," I said, bending down to pick up the note the neighbor had left. "Hailey, let's go." As we walked back down the stairs, Virginia called after us. "You'll get nothing. You're finished here. That apartment is ours now, and there's nothing you can do about it." Her voice echoed across the courtyard, and I noticed several more neighbors peering out their windows and doors. Virginia's outburst was drawing quite an audience, something I filed away for future reference. In the truck, I unfolded the note. It was from someone named Renee Collins in Unit 6. "I saw everything. Call me. 614-555-0147. Hailey was crying again, but this time it was different. Less despair, more anger. "Dad, I'm so sorry you had to see that. Virginia's been getting worse every day, and Curtis just lets her—" "Don't apologize for their behavior," I said, starting the engine. "You did nothing wrong." As we drove out of the complex, I pulled out my phone and hit speed dial. "Miles, it's Frank Thorpe. I need some advice. It's about Hailey's apartment." Miles's voice was warm but professional. "What kind of advice, Frank?" "The kind that involves getting some very unpleasant people out of my daughter's home and making sure they understand the consequences of their actions." "I see. Can you be at my office in an hour? We'll be there. As I hung up, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Hailey looking at me with something I hadn't seen in her eyes for months. Hope. Dad? What are we going to do? I thought about Virginia's sneering face, Curtis's cowardly posturing, and my granddaughter sleeping in a van because these people thought they could steal what was rightfully hers. We're going to remind them that actions have consequences, I said, and some lessons are more expensive than others. Miles Underwood's law office occupied the second floor of a restored Victorian house downtown, all dark wood paneling and leather-bound books that spoke of old-school competence. Miles himself was a tall, silver-haired man who'd aged well, the kind of lawyer who inspired confidence just by walking into a room. He listened without interruption as Hailey told her story, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. Well, he said, this should be fairly straightforward. Straightforward? Hailey looked confused. But I signed those papers that were obtained under false pretenses, Miles interrupted gently. You were told they were insurance forms, correct? And you were pressured to sign without adequate time to review them? Yes, but... Miles opened a folder and pulled out several documents. Frank asked me to do some research this morning. The apartment deed is crystal clear. The property is titled solely in your name, Hailey. Whatever you signed, it can't supersede that without proper legal process, which clearly didn't happen here. He slid a copy of the deed across his desk. See this? Hailey Marie Thorpe, single woman, as sole owner. The fact that you got married afterward doesn't automatically transfer ownership to your husband unless you specifically execute a new deed or add him to the title through proper legal channels. I felt a grim smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. So what you're saying is, they don't have a leg to stand on. Not even a toenail, Miles confirmed. But Frank, if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. I want documentation of everything. Every text message, every threat, every piece of property damage. Hailey pulled out her phone and began scrolling through messages. I have texts from Curtis going back weeks, and Virginia sent me some really nasty voicemails yesterday. Perfect. What about witnesses? I handed him Renee Collins' note. The neighbor saw everything. I'm planning to talk to her this afternoon. Miles nodded approvingly. Good. What about the personal property they threw out? Most of it's probably gone, Hailey said sadly. But I took pictures of the trash bags on the porch before I loaded them in my van. Even better. Frank, you mentioned property damage? The apartment was trashed when we saw it this morning. Pizza boxes, beer cans, cigarette burns on the furniture, and I suspect there's more damage we haven't seen yet. Miles made more notes. We'll need to document all of that. I recommend we start with a formal demand letter. Give them 48 hours to vacate the premises and return all property. When they refuse, we take them to court. What about criminal charges? I asked. That's a possibility. Theft, property damage, maybe harassment depending on those voicemails. But let's start with the civil side and see how they respond. As we left Miles's office, I felt the familiar satisfaction of a plan coming together. Back at my house, while Hailey put Lila down for a nap, I called Renee Collins. Mrs. Collins, this is Frank Thorpe, Hailey's father. Thank you for the note. Oh, Mr. Thorpe, I'm so glad you called. Renee's voice was warm but troubled. I've been so worried about Hailey and little Lila. What that woman did was just awful. Can you tell me what you saw? Everything. I was coming home from work Wednesday afternoon when I saw Virginia throwing trash bags off the balcony. When I got closer, I realized they were full of clothes and toys. Then she started screaming at Hailey, calling her all sorts of names I won't repeat. Was Curtis there? Oh yes, standing right behind his mother like always. When Hailey tried to go inside to get more of her things, he blocked the door, told her she wasn't welcome in his apartment anymore. Would you be willing to put that in writing? Maybe testify if it comes to that? Absolutely. That poor girl has been nothing but kind to everyone in this building. She always held the door for the elderly residents, helped carry groceries, let the kids play with Lila's toys. And that little girl is just precious, so well-behaved and polite. What about Virginia and Curtis? Renee's tone hardened. They're terrible. Loud music at all hours, parties every weekend, trash in the hallways. Virginia parks in other people's assigned spots and curses at anyone who complains. The whole building will be relieved when they're gone. After getting Renee's contact information and arranging to meet the next day for a formal statement, I spent the evening going through Hailey's phone with her. The evidence was damning. Weeks of increasingly hostile messages from Curtis, voicemails from Virginia that ranged from passive-aggressive to openly threatening. One text from Curtis particularly caught my attention. "Mom says you need to learn respect. Maybe a few nights on the street will teach you to appreciate what you had." Another from Virginia. "Your daddy can't save you now, princess. This is the real world." "Dad," Hailey said quietly as we compiled screenshots, "are we really going to be able to get the apartment back?" "Honey, we're not just going to get it back. We're going to make sure Curtis and Virginia understand exactly what it costs to mess with our family." That night, after Hailey and Lila were asleep in the guest room, I sat in my home office organizing everything into neat folders. Bank records showing the apartment purchase, the original deed, photos of the property damage, screenshots of threatening messages, Renee's contact information. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Family Court, Friday 2 p.m. Miles worked fast. In less than 24 hours, he'd filed an emergency petition for recovery of property and scheduled a hearing. Curtis and Virginia would be served with papers tomorrow, giving them just enough time to panic before facing a judge. I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a moment of anticipation. These people had counted on Hailey being too intimidated to fight back, and on me being too old and soft to do anything about it. They were about to learn how wrong they were on both counts. Tomorrow, we'd start taking back what was ours. And by Friday, Curtis and Virginia would discover that some mistakes carry a very public price. Thursday morning brought the kind of crisp autumn weather that made you glad to be alive. I was feeling particularly optimistic as Hailey, Lila, and I drove back to Maple Gardens, this time with a locksmith, Miles, and Officer Patricia Martinez from the County Sheriff's Department. Miles had worked his magic overnight. Not only had he gotten an emergency court order granting Hailey immediate access to her property, but he'd also arranged for law enforcement to be present in case Curtis and Virginia decided to cause trouble. "Remember," Miles said as we climbed the stairs to Unit 7, "we're here to execute a lawful court order. They can either cooperate or face additional charges for contempt of court." Officer Martinez, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, knocked on the door with the kind of authority that comes from years of dealing with difficult people. "Sheriff's Department, open up." The door opened to reveal Curtis, looking like he'd slept in his clothes. His eyes widened when he saw our little parade, and he immediately started backing away. "What? What's going on?" Miles stepped forward and handed him a folder of legal documents. "Mr. Benson, you're being served with an emergency court order. You and your mother have 1 hour to gather your personal belongings and vacate these premises." "You can't do this!" Virginia's voice screeched from somewhere inside the apartment. She appeared behind Curtis, her face flushed with rage. "This is our home now!" Officer Martinez held up the court order. "Ma'am, this is a legal document signed by Judge Patricia Hendricks. Ms. Thorpe is the lawful owner of this property, and you're trespassing." "Trespassing?" Virginia's voice climbed to a near shriek. "I'll show you trespassing." She disappeared back into the apartment, and for a moment, I thought she might actually cooperate. Then we heard a loud crash from inside. "Ma'am, you need to stop whatever you're doing in there," Officer Martinez called out, her hand moving instinctively toward her radio. The response was another crash, followed by Virginia's voice. "If I can't have it, nobody can." Officer Martinez looked at Miles, who nodded grimly. "Mrs. Benson, you're under arrest for destruction of property and interfering with a lawful court order." What followed was 15 minutes of chaos that I wouldn't have believed if I hadn't witnessed it myself. Virginia had barricaded herself in the kitchen and was systematically destroying everything she could get her hands on: dishes, appliances, even the cabinet doors. Curtis stood in the hallway wringing his hands and pleading with his mother to stop, but making no actual effort to intervene. When Officer Martinez finally managed to get inside, she found Virginia attacking the kitchen door with a wooden spoon, having apparently run out of breakable items. "Ma'am, put the spoon down and place your hands behind your back." "This is all her fault," Virginia screamed, pointing at Hailey. "She thinks she's so special because Daddy bought her an apartment. Well, let's see how special she feels now." As Officer Martinez handcuffed Virginia, I was quietly filming everything on my phone. This wasn't just evidence. This was going to be very useful in court. Curtis, meanwhile, had collapsed onto the couch and was sobbing. "Mom, why did you have to do this? Why couldn't you just leave peacefully?" "Because I raised you to be a man, not a quitter," Virginia shouted as she was led away. "Don't you dare let them push us around." After the police car disappeared with Virginia in the back seat, Curtis turned to us with tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. This wasn't supposed to happen like this." "What was it supposed to happen like?" I asked quietly. Curtis wiped his nose with his sleeve. "Mom said, she said if we just stood firm, you'd eventually give up and let us stay. She said rich people like you always back down when things get messy." Hailey stepped forward, and for a moment I thought she might actually feel sorry for him. Then she spoke, and her voice was steel. "Curtis, you threw your wife and stepdaughter out on the street. You let your mother destroy my home and threaten my family. And you did it all because you thought my father would be too polite to fight back." Curtis looked up at her with desperate eyes. "Hailey, please. We can work this out. I'll make Mom apologize. We can go to counseling." "No." The word came out flat and final. "We're done, Curtis. Miles is filing divorce papers this afternoon." As Curtis gathered his things, which took surprisingly little time since most of what was in the apartment had belonged to Hailey or Virginia, I surveyed the damage. The kitchen was a disaster, the living room furniture was ruined, and there were holes punched in several walls. "This is going to cost them a lot more than they bargained for," Miles murmured, taking photos with his phone. The locksmith, a cheerful man named Dave who'd seen it all in 30 years of business, shook his head as he worked on changing the locks. "I've seen some messy evictions, but this lady takes the cake. You'd think she was trying to get herself arrested." "Maybe she was," I said thoughtfully. "Some people would rather be the victim than admit they were wrong." By late afternoon, Hailey and Lila were back in their home. It would take weeks to repair all the damage and replace the destroyed belongings, but they were home. As I watched my granddaughter run around her bedroom, reuniting with toys she'd thought were lost forever, I felt a deep satisfaction. But we weren't finished yet. Tomorrow was the court hearing, and I had a feeling Virginia and Curtis were going to provide us with one final show. That evening, as I tucked Lila into her own bed for the first time in a week, she looked up at me with those serious 4-year-old eyes. "Grandpa Frank, are the mean people going to come back?" "No, sweetheart. The mean people are going to learn that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences last a very long time." As I turned off her light and closed the door, my phone buzzed with a text from Miles. "Virginia made bail. Both she and Curtis will be at the hearing tomorrow. This should be interesting." I smiled in the darkness. Interesting was one word for it. I had a few others in mind. Friday afternoon, the family court waiting room buzzed with the usual mix of nervous energy and barely contained drama. Divorce proceedings, custody battles, property disputes. It was all there, playing out in whispered conversations and tense silences. I sat with Hailey and Miles, our evidence folders neatly organized on the bench beside us. Across the room, Curtis and Virginia huddled with a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Virginia was dressed in what I assumed was her idea of courtroom attire, a loud floral dress that had seen better days and enough costume jewelry to stock a small store. Curtis wore an ill-fitting suit that probably belonged to his father, constantly tugging at the collar like it was choking him. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Hendricks," the bailiff announced. Judge Hendricks was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd seen every possible variety of human foolishness. She took her seat and immediately got down to business. "This is the matter of Thorpe versus Benson, case number FC 2023-1847. Mr. Underwood, you may proceed." Miles stood and began laying out our case with surgical precision. The apartment deed, clearly showing Hailey as sole owner, the fraudulent papers Curtis and Virginia had used to justify their takeover, the threatening text messages and voicemails, photos of the property damage, Renee Collins's written statement about the eviction. "Your Honor," Miles concluded, "this is a clear case of theft, fraud, and property destruction. The defendants have caused substantial financial and emotional damage to my client and her minor child." Judge Hendricks nodded and turned to the public defender. "Mr. Walsh, how do your clients respond to these allegations?" The public defender, a tired-looking man named Walsh, stood reluctantly. "Your Honor, my clients maintain that Mrs. Benson acted within her rights as the wife of—" "Objection," Miles interrupted. "Mrs. Benson is not married to my client. Mr. Curtis Benson is married to my client. Mrs. Virginia Benson is his mother and has no legal standing whatsoever in this matter." "Sustained," Judge Hendricks said dryly. "Mr. Walsh, please clarify your client's position." Before Walsh could respond, Virginia jumped to her feet. "Your Honor, if I may speak for myself." "Mrs. Benson, please remain seated and let your attorney—" "That man doesn't know what he's talking about." Virginia's voice carried across the courtroom, drawing stares from other families waiting for their cases. "My son has every right to that apartment. He's the man of the house now, and that spoiled little princess needs to learn some respect." Judge Hendricks's expression could have frozen water. "Mrs. Benson, you will sit down and remain silent, or I will hold you in contempt of court." "Contempt? I'll show you contempt." Virginia turned toward our table, pointing an accusatory finger at Hailey. "She's been poisoning my son against me from day one, trying to turn him into some kind of house husband. Curtis is a real man, not like these weak—" "Mrs. Benson!" Judge Hendricks's voice cracked like a whip. "Sit down immediately." But Virginia was just getting started. "And you!" She wheeled around to point at me. "You think your money makes you better than everyone else? Well, let me tell you something, old man." "Mom, please." Curtis finally spoke up, tugging at his mother's dress. "You're making it worse." "Worse? How can it be worse? They're trying to steal our home." Virginia shook off Curtis's hand and continued her tirade. "My poor baby has been through enough. First his wife abandons him, then her daddy comes swooping in with his lawyers and his money." "Your poor baby is 30 years old," Judge Hendricks said icily, "and he's perfectly capable of speaking for himself. Mr. Curtis Benson, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Curtis stood up slowly, his face red with embarrassment. He opened his mouth to speak, but Virginia cut him off. "Don't you say a word, Curtis. These people are trying to trick you. You just let Mama handle this." The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the other families waiting for their cases had stopped their whispered conversations to watch the show. I noticed several people holding up their phones, recording Virginia's meltdown. Judge Hendricks looked like she was developing a headache. "Mrs. Benson, this is your final warning. Sit down and be quiet, or you will be removed from this courtroom." "Removed? By who? You? Virginia let out a harsh laugh. You're all in on it together. The lawyers, the judges, the police, all protecting the rich people while the rest of us get stepped on. That's when Curtis finally found his voice. Mom, stop. Please, just stop. Don't you tell me to stop. I'm fighting for your rights. I'm fighting for our family. What family? Curtis's voice cracked with emotion. Look around you, Mom. Look what we've done. We threw a woman and a little girl out on the street. We destroyed their home. We're not the victims here. Virginia stared at her son in shock, as if he'd just slapped her. Curtis, honey, you don't mean that. You're just confused because they're pressuring you. I'm not confused, Curtis shouted, and for the first time since I'd known him, he actually sounded like a man instead of a petulant child. I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed of what we did, and I'm ashamed of myself for going along with it. The courtroom was completely silent now. Even the bailiff was watching with fascination as 30 years of dysfunction played out in front of a room full of strangers. Curtis Benson, you apologize to your mother right now. Virginia's voice was shrill with panic. I raised you better than this. I sacrificed everything for you. And that's the problem. Curtis turned to face her fully. You never let me grow up. You never let me make my own decisions. And now look where we are, about to lose everything because you couldn't stand the thought of me being happy with someone else. Judge Hendricks watched this family drama unfold with the expression of someone who'd seen it all before, but never quite this publicly. Behind me, I could hear the soft sounds of phones recording every word. Your Honor, Miles said quietly, I think the defendants have made our case for us. Judge Hendricks nodded. Indeed they have. Mrs. Benson, Mr. Benson, based on the evidence presented and your behavior in this courtroom, I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiff. You are ordered to pay restitution for property damage in the amount of $8,500 plus court costs and attorney fees. Mrs. Virginia Benson, you are also sentenced to 30 days in jail for destruction of property and contempt of court. Virginia's face went white. Jail? You can't put me in jail. I'm a grandmother. I have rights. You had rights, Judge Hendricks said coldly. You forfeited them when you decided to destroy someone else's property and turn my courtroom into a circus. As the bailiff approached Virginia with handcuffs, she turned one last time to Curtis. Don't let them do this to me. I'm your mother. You're supposed to protect me. Curtis looked at his mother with tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't protect you from the consequences of your own actions anymore. The sound Virginia made as they led her away was somewhere between a wail and a shriek. This isn't over. You'll all pay for this. You can't treat people like this. But it was over. As the courtroom began to empty, I noticed several people uploading videos to their phones. Within hours, Virginia's meltdown would be all over social media, viewed by thousands of people who would see exactly what kind of person she really was. Curtis approached our table hesitantly. Hailey, I know I don't deserve it, but I'm sorry. I'm really, truly sorry. Hailey looked at him for a long moment. I know you are, Curtis, but sorry doesn't undo the damage. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that you chose your mother over your wife and stepdaughter. Curtis nodded, tears still flowing. I know, I wanted you to know that I realize how wrong I was. As he walked away, shoulders slumped in defeat, Hailey turned to me. Do you think he'll be okay? That's not our problem anymore, I said gently. Our problem was getting you and Lila back where you belong. Mission accomplished. Miles packed up his files with obvious satisfaction. Frank, I have to say, in 30 years of practicing law, I've never seen defendants make such a compelling case against themselves. That video is going to follow them for a very long time. As we left the courthouse, I felt the deep satisfaction of a job well done. Curtis and Virginia had thought they were dealing with people who would roll over and accept their theft. Instead, they discovered that some lessons are learned in public and some mistakes follow you forever. The last thing I heard as we walked to the parking lot was the sound of laughter from a group of young people watching something on their phones. Virginia's courtroom meltdown was already going viral, and by tomorrow, thousands of people would know exactly what happened when you mess with the wrong family. Justice, I reflected, sometimes comes with its own built-in amplification system.